The great part of being a man is you can build a lot of these things, right? So you can build your income, you can build your body, you can build your network, you can build your social skills by doing a lot of these things, by actively working on yourself.
Oliver Anwar is the founder of Elite Performance, a fitness and health service which enables entrepreneurs to operate at their best without compromising their body.
I was basically putting Kit Kats in vending machines for 12 hours a day. If I keep just, finishing the job and coming back after I finish to work on my business, something would give, right? I was like, let's just keep plugging away. If you just sit behind books or you sit behind just listen to the podcast and you don't actually go out in the real world and get into the arena, you never really know what you're made of, and you're never really going to test yourself and build up that kind of tolerance to stress, tolerance to failure, tolerance to all these things that come. How's it going, man? Yeah, good. Yourself?
Very, very good. Looking forward to this one. I've seen recently on social media, you recently spending some time in the Maldives, and by your Instagram, it seems as if you travel quite a lot. And I was actually speaking to a guy called Suhit. I don't know if you've come across Suhit Amin,
No.
entrepreneur similar to yourself, but he works in influencer marketing. But he's been spending some time in Portugal, and he was telling me on the last episode that's yet to go out yet. Do you find it easier to perform in a foreign country? And he said yes, sticking to all the protocols and being able to manage your and schedule and stuff. And obviously you speak a lot about health optimization and getting vitamin D, sunning, etc. So do you find it easier to stick to your protocol traveling and living abroad?
It's a really good question, man. And it's kind of funny because it's something I've debated a lot recently. And one of the things is that I've found personally when I'm working is having a base is really useful. So like right now, I'm actually based in Manchester and I've got like an apartment here. Like you can see, I've got a desk and my setup and things. And I work really well with routine. So if I stick to a good routine, I have everything there. Like it's really good for me to execute because there's nothing interfering. There's no spontaneity that's kind of ruining my progress, right? And I love spontaneity in the right doses, but I can find if I'm like, let's say, like a digital nomad, which I've done before, or I'm away and I don't have certain things, my routine gets thrown up in the air, which is really weird. So I don't think it matters as much like where you are. I'd much rather be in Dubai than, in rainy Manchester. But I think the key thing really for me is like having a base of, okay, this is my routine. This is where the gym is. This is where I get my food. This is my desk. This is my working hours. And just being very regimented with that. Like I work really well with that kind of structure. But from I would say like a overall like happiness perspective, a health perspective, being in a warmer climate, being somewhere like abroad, like Dubai, that I've lived in Lisbon for a little bit, in these warm climates has a huge impact on your mood, man. Vitamin D is going to improve sleep quality. It's going to improve testosterone. It's going to improve like, your daily happiness. Like I woke up today and there was sun outside and blue skies in Manchester for once. And I was like, man, today's going to be great. And it just has that knock-on effect. So I hope that kind of answers your question there, man.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing because I've always had this idealistic thing of moving abroad and hopefully living, especially if you build up a personal brand and a system
Yeah.
like you have to be able to work remotely. But of course, then you're distant from friends and you've got to re-network. And as you say, the logistics of sorting out supermarket and finding the local gym and all those sorts of things can be a bit challenging. So I suppose if you're
Yeah.
moving around, it's a problem.
Definitely, mate. And I think, it's okay if like you settle in one place and you know what you're doing. But, I've been to places for like, let's say 1 or 2 months and you kind of have this, bit of a dilemma where you're kind of like, oh, I'm only here for a month. I want to go out and enjoy it. I want to go to all the bars. I want to go to all the restaurants. I want to go to all the clubs. I want to see what the city's like. But at the same time, you kind of have to work and you're like, well, I need to do both. And you're kind of stuck in this limbo. Whereas I really like now having a base to work from and then being like, hey, look, like the last week or 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago, I was in the Maldives. So I said, hey, look, this is just going to be my week on holiday. I'm going to go away, get my vitamin D, enjoy it, not do much work, then come back and work. And then boom, I'm back to it. And like for me, it kind of gives me this like segmentation of like, okay, this is fun time, this is work time, and allows me to split things up. And I guess it's something maybe I need to get better at. I know some people that can live this digital nomad life and be very successful. So it's not to say you can't do it, but I kind of know myself quite well and find that this is a really good structure for me.
So for the listeners that don't know, and obviously you're in a position now to be able to do this, what is it that you do?
Sure. So I run a health optimization or digital wellness company for entrepreneurs. So we help them with body transformation, internal health change, and just driving and improving their performance in both life and work. And the way we do that is through our 3 and 6 month programs based on our system that we use. So yeah, that's kind of what I do now full time.
I've had a few guests on the podcast, sort of similar, talking about similar topics to you. So it'd be interesting to hear your comments later on in the podcast. But for the listeners who don't know, basically when I send out podcast invitations, I ask the guests to describe themselves a little bit. I don't know if you can remember filling this in, but
I
you
do,
said you
yeah.
were extroverted, driven, ambitious, curious, adventurous, and heuristic, and you
hmm
want to build for the long term. So
hmm
all of those traits, all those things you've described there, why did you pick those traits? Who are you?
Yes, it's a good question. So I'd say those kind of like personality traits are kind of who I am at my core. When I look at throughout my life, the things that I've kind of done have been, I've been very driven. For example, when I was younger, I played an elite level of football in the UK. So I was very fortunate to play a good level when I was younger, and I guess I got that competitive edge to want to become a professional footballer as I got older. And it definitely came from that. Unfortunately, I didn't make it as a professional footballer, and that really did kind of dent my self-confidence, self-esteem, and ego as I got to kind of like 17. And then from there, I kind of went to a sporting college where I studied A levels and playing a good level of football there as well. And I was actually very insecure, right? I was very like, not making it as a professional and then being like this short, skinny footballer in a college full of big rugby players. I kind of felt a bit out of place. So I really started, I guess that's when my passion for hitting the gym started. I started hitting the gym and was very driven and motivated to really push my body to the level that I wanted to reach my full potential and see where I could get to. And I made tons of mistakes along the way, man. It was a bit crazy. So yeah, I then kind of started learning how to do things, and that kind of helped me kind of set up the business I have today and do what I do. So I think the drive and ambition comes from playing a lot of kind of competitive sport and competitive, you know, things as a young kid. And I'd say like the adventure has come from like the travel side of things. So you can see that I've traveled a lot just through my Instagram. I've been to 35 different countries, and having a dad, so my dad's from actually Indonesia, and my mum's English, so I've been back to Indonesia quite a lot as a young kid. And I think having that exposure to different cultures as a young kid made me realize how big the world actually is, and the amount of experiences that you can have if you get out of your hometown and actually do something interesting and a bit more adventurous, and that's really stuck with me. So that adventure side is there. And I'd say the bit about the long term would be just that I guess it's a stage of life that I've now got to where I don't look at things so much as short term. And I guess you go through phases in life, right? There's chapters where things are transient. Maybe you're, meeting people like, while you're traveling, and they're not going to be long term friends, or maybe you're casually dating, right? And you're just hooking up for a bit of fun and things like that. But for me, the way I look at life now is very much like long term. It's kind of like, hey, who can I build long term relationships with, both, friendships, businesses, work life, intimate relationships, all these kinds of things, because I feel that if you do that, these things kind of compound, and when things compound, that's how you kind of make this long-term progress. You get more leverage, and I think it's having more meaningful kind of a more meaningful life, right, and more meaningful connections by having things that are a bit more long term. So yeah, man, that's kind of like summing up what that meant in the application there.
And just to pick up off the back of you mentioned the building for the long term. Conscious of the fact that maybe an average listener of this podcast is probably in that 18 to 25 window of potentially university students or embarking on their, I guess, career, their foray into the world of work. And so how do you think they should strike the balance between being long-term focused? Because I feel like there's obviously a balance to be struck, especially the younger you get. You do want to be able to go out and enjoy things, and potentially have a party phase. Although I necessarily wouldn't endorse that. But how do you kind of strike that as you get older? Is it something that you reflect back on and you don't really regret what you've done in the past, or would you rather have built for the future earlier on?
Really good question, man. One of the things I think I'm really happy about and proud about is I haven't lived with any regrets. So there's nothing that I've done that I thought I've regretted it. And in my early 20s and late teens, I partied a lot. I made lots of mistakes. Both in like relationships, like I was broke. That just made bad decisions. I partied a lot, but the biggest teacher, you can listen to me on the podcast, and maybe I can help you maybe stop making the mistakes, but you only build character and you only build understanding through going through these experiences yourself, and actually going through a bit of pain, a bit of like heartache or heartbreak, or feeling really down in the dumps, because that actually builds your character. If you just sit behind like books, or you sit behind just listen to the podcast, and you don't actually go out in the real world and get into the arena, you never really know what you're made of, and you're never really going to test yourself and build up that kind of tolerance to stress, tolerance to failure, tolerance to all these things that come. So I wouldn't say I'm in the position to give life advice to people, but what I would say is like really just put yourself out there. Try to travel a lot. Try to meet as many people as possible. Try a lot of new things, and always be optimistic and work hard. I think if you do that, the right opportunities are going to find you. And now, I'm 28 now. I've started to flip the way that I look at life and look a bit more towards the longer term of certain things. But I definitely didn't have that kind of mindset when I was in my early 20s and stuff. So that's kind of how I would look at it, if that makes sense.
It's like generally the experience of life teaches you to gradually look to the long term, but it's not necessarily a bad thing to enjoy life for what it is at certain stages, I suppose. And so
100%. Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad because I think that's a worry, and especially as I've developed. I mean, I've just turned 22, and I think there's definitely been points in my life at 18 or 19 or 20 where I've been considered potentially too serious by friends, and I've had to really like evaluate, like, am I doing too much long term building? Am I being too serious and too self development focused? So obviously that is a balance that we all sort of need to strike. And you speak about earlier, trying to make it as a professional footballer and then transitioning across into sort of the gym world and making every sort of mistake. And so, what's the biggest thing that you think you've taken on board from that early process to then now relay back to the clients that you work with, whether they're entrepreneurs or whatever, in terms of the gym fitness?
Yeah, really good question. I'd say the most important thing is, and this is so simple, it's simplicity and consistency, right? So if you're busy, or if you want to get into a fitness regimen, you don't need to be doing something that's complicated, and you don't need to be doing something that you're only going to do for a few weeks, because what's the point in that, right? It's never going to sustain long term. It's never going to compound, and you're going to find it too difficult to execute. So I like sticking to simple workouts that you can do that allows you to have consistency with your routine. So whether that is body weight, whether that's gym workouts, being able to do that consistently over time is what's going to elicit the progress. If you train for 2 weeks and then you give it all up because it's too complicated, it's too much mental bandwidth to do it, well, it's a waste of time, and you're back at square one with less motivation than you had. So really try and build up slowly, simple, consistent, and let that compound. And then as you do that over the course of time and you follow the key principles of training, you're going to get results, and you'll actually start to enjoy it. I think a lot of people want enjoyment from training. They're like, oh, I want the best program, when really you would actually get enjoyment from getting the results, right? When you start to see results, you're like, hey, look, I'm starting to feel motivated now. So that would be my advice to people. One of the biggest lessons I've learned.
And of course, then I touched on it, but alongside that whole fitness journey, you've gone into building the platform that you currently operate. But I want to understand kind of the origins of it and where you were at with work, let's say like 5, 10 years ago. How has your way of making money kind of evolved alongside your physique, and then how have those things kind of crossed over at the present day?
Yeah, good question. So I actually set up my company or my business when I was at university. I was a broke student that wanted to get a little bit more money to go on student nights out and things, right? And I'd actually developed, I went through a breakup when I was like 21, and that was really the fuel to really take my physique to the next level, right? You hear that famous saying, breakups make bodybuilders, and it definitely did in my scenario. Alongside some other stuff that was going on, it really just fueled all the pain and negativity that I was feeling towards the gym, and turned it into something positive. Developed a good physique by the time I was about 21. And I was at university at this point, and the good thing was I kind of had a lot of people asking, hey, how did you get into training and things like that? So I started basically doing this website which I launched, and people then began asking questions about packages and things like that. So then I started to sell packages to people regarding training. This was a little bit of extra side income alongside university. Started making a bit of money with that, but it wasn't really good enough money to me to really do it full time. So after I finished university, I got a corporate job in central London where I worked for a big telecommunications company. So I was basically balancing trying to get this business off the ground while doing a corporate job, which was pretty stressful and quite interesting for me to see kind of the challenges that professionals faced and people that worked in the city. And it kind of evolved from me working with general population people to then working with people like me, so busy professionals that were in the same position, which was pretty interesting. And then what happened was I was sick of the corporate life after about 6 months. I remember I was on a balcony overlooking the Thames in this apartment I couldn't really afford, and I was like, I was miserable, man. I was drinking a lot. I wasn't sleeping well. I was working like a dog. I didn't have time for going out to date. I didn't have time to, really see a lot of my friends. It was just a very miserable existence. And I said, this can't go on. So the next day I kind of wrote a notice letter and handed it into work. And I just said, look, I'm quitting in the next couple of months. And that was that. So I quit the job, and to kind of ensure I had income on the side, I basically had a freelancing job doing some extra work. But it got about 3 months after I quit, and I realized, shit, I haven't got enough money, right? So my business wasn't picking off as much as I thought it would, and the freelance kind of gigs kind of dried up. So I was at the point where I was broke, and I was basically couldn't pay rent, man, which was not good. So luckily, one of my friends had a vending machine company, so he said, "Hey, look, I can give you a job." Driving vending machines around. What you can do is like work 12 hours a day and basically fill vending machines across the south of the UK. Actually, it was near Bournemouth and things, as well as South London. And yeah, I was basically putting Kit Kats in vending machines for 12 hours a day, which was an interesting experience, man. But at this point, it was quite a pivotal moment, because I realized, you know what, like, I am going to get through this. And I did realize that, if I keep just, finishing the job and coming back after I finished to work on my business, something would give, right? I was like, let's just keep plugging away. Let's keep trying to see if this can work. And it did, with a bit of good fortune, and I guess getting my business acumen up to a high level. I basically started to make more money with my business. And I said, look, I can quit the vending machine business now. 2020 hit, COVID hit, which was a bit of good fortune. And, everyone was looking for online trainers. So I really started pumping out content online and doing that kind of thing. Started a Twitter account, and then boom, we're where we are today. So 2-3 years down the line, I'm now doing this full time, and fortunate enough to make this my gig that I love to do each day. So yeah, man, that's a bit of an origin story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it gives an insight into the relentless iteration process that you need to go through just to constantly reinvent what you're doing in like minor ways. I don't mean reinvent in its entirety, but just consistently moving the needle and consistently trying to almost like not taking no for an answer, right? And just going, I will make this work eventually, and navigating your way through to then having that break. And we've got to play the hand that we've been dealt. And I think when the pandemic hits, yes, of course, it's a net negative for a lot of people, but you can then flip it on its head and go, well, how can I capitalize on people's willingness to want to go and build up their bodies, I guess. And it's
Yep.
something you speak about as well. There's those parallels between the consistency between the gym and in building your business, and those two things obviously running parallel alongside each other. Do you think that the physique that you're building and the mentality that you get from remaining disciplined in the gym carries across into the way you apply yourself in the business? And do you think also that it helps with the business and just purely in terms of like the optics and bringing in that kind of identity capital with the personal brand?
Really good question, man. I'd say absolutely they run in line, right? Like, if you can build your body up to a point where, you've built good muscle mass, you're at a healthy body fat percentage, you challenge yourself mentally and physically, that's like, that translates to anything you do. You translate that to the dating market, right? And going out and maybe getting rejected quite a few times, but actually sticking at it, staying disciplined, going and still talking to girls, right? That is still works in parallel with the gym, right? Turning up, failing with the weights, but actually going again the next day and be like, look, I'm going to try and be stronger and not let that happen. And it absolutely translates to business, right? Like, if you've got the same mindset for business that, okay, these prospects are saying no to me, well, let's figure it out and try again tomorrow, and actually be disciplined in putting in those reps, which are really important. It absolutely has an impact. And I think a lot of people in business and in life, they can give up. And one of the things that I haven't done is I haven't give up, right? I've always, whatever's happened, I've pushed forward. No matter how bad it's got, I've said, let's keep going, let's keep going, let's keep pushing. We'll figure it out. We can do this. And I kept that positive attitude despite what was going on. And I think if you combine something like a positive attitude with also getting the right coaching, and I'd say getting the right signal and the right roadmap to maybe overcoming some of the challenges that you're facing, I think that's the recipe for success. Because a good attitude coupled with the right framework is always going to lead to somebody that's going to be good at what they do, because there's kind of the two aspects of it. There's the self-awareness, right? It's saying, okay, I understand what's going wrong. And then the growth mindset, which is kind of like, hey, look, I understand things are going wrong, but I can make this better, right? If you've got those two things, self-awareness and the growth mindset, I really do think you can be successful. And like I said, coupling that with, maybe the right mentor or the right framework or the right understanding of where you need to go to solve these problems, I think you can get there. So I hope that kind of answers the question there. I went off on a bit of a tangent.
No, it does, and it rings true as well with podcasting. People say that, however many percentage of podcasts drop off after their 5th or 10th or 15th episode, and I'm hoping to keep becoming a less and less percentile in that. Hoping to keep going, obviously. But it's an interesting thing, that self belief and that perseverance. And I'm wondering, is there anything in your childhood where you can like look back retrospectively and kind of connect the dots between, I don't know, where things were positively reinforced by your parents, or like some kind of self belief doing the footballing stuff? Is there anything where you can kind of pick the dots now?
I love this question. I've been asked this on other podcasts as well, and I don't know where the origin comes from. It's very weird, but all I can say is that innately, the way that I feel is I always feel that I'm going to make it. Like I always have this self-belief, and maybe it is, my mum saying that she'd always support me and things like that, from my youth. Maybe it's like my dad, he came from a small village in Indonesia that didn't have any electricity, and he basically moved me and my family over to the UK, and maybe seeing that and understanding that example of probably, the endeavors that took maybe had a knock-on effect on me. Like I'm not completely sure where to pinpoint that. I was also, relatively good at football as a young kid, and got some positive reinforcement there. So maybe that was it. I don't know, man. It's a tough one, but I would just say innately, like I just have this belief that whatever happens to me, I'll get over it, and it's going to be good, and I can overcome it. And that's all I really know, to be honest.
It's almost it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? It's like the story you tell yourself. I
Yeah.
think, there's no guarantee of the outcome, but it definitely will help to shape, as you've mentioned yourself, your own story, kind of a bounce back from a breakup led you into the gym. It's seeing everything as a way to then, okay, this thing has happened, but how can I morph it into my future identity and make a positive out of it, and continue that drive. One of the questions I had, and it's something that's kind of been bugging me as I'm starting to create content myself and thinking about just creating some more short form content with me speaking, is that I feel like all the stuff that I've come across in the last few years seems obvious to me now because I've been in this space for a few years. And so when you were building this platform, and even now when you're sort of tweeting out and posting and generating leads and doing all that kind of stuff and helping your clients, is ever a thing internally that you kind of, you're questioning, oh, isn't this stuff obvious, or is it because you have that connection with your clients that that people really struggle with the basic things that you deal with now?
It's a great question, man. I think if you look at the landscape of the population, the US is a great example. I think there's like something crazy, like 70-80% of people are obese, right? So when you look at that, you see how much people don't understand, or a gap in their knowledge and understanding of what it takes to be healthy. And it's not helped by kind of like the government and these health policies, which really don't help people, right? Like you look at the whole COVID situation and what happened there. Like they locked people up in their houses and force fed them food and said, look, stay inside, don't do much exercise or moving, and this is how you get to good health. And I've always been a proponent of trying to fix the root cause of what's going on and not the symptoms. And it's difficult for people to see that because they've always grown up with the big pharma, or they've grown up with the healthcare system, and if you get sick you take pills and you take medication. And I've always grown up as someone that's very healthy and looked at life as like, okay, it's on me to really look at like what I'm doing in my lifestyle, my nutrition, my training, my sleep, all of this kind of stuff, so I can be healthy going forward, so I never have to visit the doctor, right? That's the way that I've always looked at it. But for other people, they haven't. So when I put out content, I really try and look at them in mind and be like, hey, look, these are all the things that I do with my lifestyle to keep healthy and prevent sicknesses, illnesses, diseases. And then I think that helps them understand that there is this different world out there where you can be healthy and fit without having to take medications, pills, and all this kind of other stuff, and gives them an understanding of what they need to do, if that makes sense.
I think that's true, isn't it? Because we surround ourselves with like-minded people. So you and I probably exist in a relative bubble of people who all kind of are interested in, I don't know, testosterone, health optimization,
Yeah.
sleep, gym bro splits, etc. So we are aware of it. But as you mentioned, a lot of these people just aren't aware, or they've never been shown exactly how to do those things step by step. And obviously the inertia to get into these things from a modern world where we're fed comfort, and especially as you mentioned, the government and the way that things are generally propagated isn't set up to then need to go and educate yourself. So you just kind of take everything on surface value. And I want to pick up on just one of the things you mentioned there, which is the pandemic with the lockdown and how gyms were closed and stuff. What was your whole take on the fact that despite this, I mean, the texts have been coming out now with I don't know, the Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson kind of doing the numbers and stuff a couple of years ago. But what was your mindset at with that? I know your business was taking off, but with the pandemic itself.
Yeah, I thought it was a big kind of, I don't want to put a tinfoil hat on here, but I do think it was a kind of control mechanism of, kind of getting people to do what they wanted them to do, right? The government. I felt the government were losing power, and, there's lots of maybe different theories around that, but I do think that they were completely over, you could say, controlled in what they did. They, forced people to stay inside. The kind of rules that they put in place were very authoritarian, and you can tell that there wasn't really a concern for health. It was all about control. It was all about making sure you did what you were told. And I think that probably didn't do a lot of people good, man, from what I've heard. And a lot of people will go through a lot of mental kind of struggles through this time because they were locked inside and they weren't exercising, they couldn't socialize, they couldn't see their friends. And the policies that they made, I felt, were very kind of blanket policies, right? So they were like, right, everybody needs a vaccine, despite the fact that there was a 99.97% survival rate for a lot of people, and there was natural immunity, and we've seen this with places like Sweden, right? So it does make sense for maybe people that have high risk to maybe take the vaccine and stay inside and things like that. But for the young, the fit, the healthy, someone like me, I never took the vaccine. I mean, I caught COVID. I was ill for a little bit, and then I got over it, and I was fine. And I think a lot of other people were kind of like, well, let's just crack on with it, right? There's no need to have this huge lockdown, which has affected economies, people's mental health, relationships, health, all of this kind of stuff. So I think it was a complete over exaggeration. And I think now, like you said, it's come out that, people were kind of instigating this to be a way to kind of control population, to push things like big pharma, vaccines, money to the elites. It's all started to come out a bit. So I'm really glad that I kind of stuck to my guns and said, hey, look, this is like what I believe. And if you follow me for a while, you know that I was very kind of anti the lockdowns, anti the forced the what was the word? The prevention of freedom of choice for the vaccine. I'm not pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine. Do whatever you need to do, but you should have the choice of whether you take it or not. And I was very anti kind of the freedom of choice that they were at the anti freedom of choice that they were doing, and the other bits that were going on. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on what happened.
I think it was always a tricky one. It was striking that balance, but as you say, there was lots of negative externalities which can't be accounted for in the decision. The economy, people's mental health, and also health in general because of
Mm-hmm.
waiting lists and things. And I think that's a challenge that I was trying to bring at the time. But we were told, for going out and going to the gym, you were said that you were killing your grandparents and something. It was just
Yeah.
a bit over dramatic. And again, it's that manipulation and control which I think people rebelled against.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one of the things that you talk about in your onboarding, I had a look through it because I was just curious as to what your whole system is tracking the key KPIs for the body.
Yeah.
And rather than delving into that, because I'm sure people can sort of find that from your work, the question I wanted to ask is, can we overanalyze and over rely on data over like subjective feeling and measurement?
100%, man. I think that there's a big trend now for people to be super data focused, super, you see this with a lot of the biohackers, right? They want to hit all the numbers and all the data, right? And um, I mean, they're just numbers, man. At the end of the day, what is it? What is your North Star? And I think for most people, their North Star is, hey, look, I want to look good, right? I want to have more energy. I want to feel confident, right? I want to be focused. I want to sleep well. Well, you don't really need any numbers to tell you that, right? Like you can know yourself how you feel. If you feel a 10 out of 10 or you feel a 2 out of 10, it's very easy to see. I think it's good to bring data in as we kind of get a bit more kind of nuance with things. As people start to already have a foundation, a baseline, and they want to take it to the next level and reach their peak, I do think that data can be really important because, you're then looking at week on week, okay, how are we improving? Are we ensuring we're doing the right things and stuff like that? So I think data is really useful, not always from the start, but towards like the parts that are a bit more extreme, right? So a bit more kind of like you're trying to push things really far. Data can be good. My personal view is like I think it's a good idea to track anyway from the start, like just to track data, not read too much into it, but just have data so we can understand where we are and obviously where we want to go and see the improvements. I think that's really good because the truth is data doesn't lie, right? Data does say, hey, look, like you're sleeping this amount of hours and stuff like that, that's useful. Or you do a DEXA scan and it will say, hey, look, this is your body fat percentage now, and this is your body fat percentage after 12 weeks of following the process. So you actually get some specific tangibles there. But if you didn't want to use the data and you did just want to do it yourself, going off feel, going off how you look, going off like, your energy each day is fine. So I kind of hope that answers your question there, man.
It is a again, each person is different, aren't they? And some people
Yeah.
like to be more data driven, and others get put off or even have an unhealthy relationship when they get too numbers focused, especially with weight and stuff. So I think it's definitely trying to be holistic, and I mean, I suppose that's exactly kind of what you offer with your programming. As a general point to kind of close off the discussion about the business side of stuff, what is the most challenging thing that you've found, not in terms of the clients, but just purely in terms of like scaling the business to where it is now? What's been the biggest challenges with like the logistics, or like is it like tax where you're like moving around countries, or is it just the number of leads you're trying to get in the marketing?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the biggest challenges, I think, for any online coach or health professional is kind of like, how do we scale without sacrificing the quality of what we're doing, right? So you want to ensure that the client feels like they're getting the one-on-one kind of attention that they paid for. But then obviously that's okay when you've got maybe 5, 10 clients, but when you get to the point where you've got hundreds of clients, how do you still offer that same level of service to people? So that's kind of the stage I'm in at the minute, is as I scale up, like how are we ensuring that the delivery side of things is not just scalable, but really providing value to the customers, so they feel like they're getting, the great results, they're being held accountable, that their penny is, their time, their cost of value is high, right? Or whatever it is. So I think that's maybe one of the most challenging things for sure.
And you've spoken about it on a lot of podcasts, and it is something that I want to touch on. You're probably fed up of mentioning him, but as you've kind of scaled up through to this point in your business, of course, one of the natural byproducts, and again, it would have been spoken about in a previous podcast with Suhit, is the networks that you then find yourself
Yeah.
in. Andrew Tate, I've seen it's the pinned image on your Instagram account. It's the
Yep.
first thing I saw. How on earth have you linked up with Andrew Tate in the past?
It's a great question, man. So Andrew was following me we followed each other on Twitter for a while before one of his many accounts got banned. And I was actually in Prague. I posted a video to say I was in Prague. And he DM'd me out of the blue, just like, hey, man, I'm in Prague. Like, do you fancy catching up? I've got the evening free. And we'd kind of like, I hadn't really spoken to him directly, but we kind of liked and commented on each other's tweets. And we had a very kind of similar mindset in regards to like a health, fitness, personal responsibility, and things like that. So I guess he just wanted to kind of catch up and hang out. So we did that. I met him in a cigar lounge in Prague. We ended up smoking some cigars, having a few drinks, and it's a very pleasant experience. Actually, I think it's been horrible to see the level of kind of like the attack that the mainstream media has really put on him, because, I can only speak from the experience that I've had with him. And, I've met a few of his close friends as well. And they've all said that, he's a very genuine, kind, and, considerate person. It doesn't always come across like that through the media and through TikTok and through videos that are cut up and things. So, I know that he's away at the minute, and I really just hope people could see that other side of him that is like those things that I mentioned, right? A very good, honest person. So, yeah, it was a great experience, and I'm a big fan of Andrew, not just his kind of demeanor in regards to his personality traits, but also the way he's marketed himself. This past year, in 2022, I think the amount of attention and eyeballs he's got on him, whether you like him or hate him, the level of marketing that has gone into what he's done is next level, man. It's the funnels that he's built, the amount of people he's been able to get chanting his name is incredible, man. So yeah, it was a very interesting experience, and he's a good person to have him in my network for sure.
It's funny you mention the number of people saying his name. I mean, it's kind of ironic that obviously we're talking about him, but also
Yeah,
I think you've been on Colin Campbell's podcast quite a while
that's
back.
right. Yeah.
But he actually posted on his story last night, as of recording this, that it wouldn't be a male podcast without talking about Andrew Tate, and he posted a
Mm.
reel of someone talking about him. So I
Yep.
think one of the questions that people really want to know is what's the difference in his temperament and who he is in real life compared to the persona that is maybe projected online, especially in the clips that are even more provocative and a little bit on the fringe of what might be deemed acceptable.
Yeah, it's a good question, man. I think there's a person that like turns up for work every day, and there's a person that you go for drinks with, right? And I'm sure in everyday life, I try and break it down like this example. You're going to be different, when you're out for drinks with your mates compared to when you're sat in the office with your boss, right? It is kind of true. And the way that social media works is for a lot of people, it's a job, and you maybe say things that are a little bit extravagant, and you act in a different way compared to the ways that you would act, in different scenarios, right? So not to say that he's fake, and not to say that he is, putting on a facade. I'd say people are different in different scenarios, and you can exaggerate things, very well, right? So I think he says things that are very black and white, and really the reality of life is probably in the grey. A lot of things, there's context to them. So if he says something and it's cut into 15 seconds, you could be like, okay, part of that is true, but part of that is not true. But people don't really think like that. A lot of people are like, oh no, that's misogynistic, or that's this, or that's that. Like, they haven't looked at the full picture. And I think that's the issue with a lot of short form content. Things can get blown out of context, like extremely. And someone could have said something as a joke, or he could have said something as a joke, or a satire, right? And it gets blown up as he's this kind of person. And I think if you look at it, a lot of his longer form content, and like when I've met him in person, he speaks a lot of kind of sense. He speaks very articulate about a lot of topics in regards to definitely like masculinity, right? Like, as a guy, go out there and work hard, go to the gym, look after yourself. I think that's a very positive message, and have self-respect, and try and build yourself into a high value person. I think a lot of young men need that, because a lot of them are sat watching porn, or they're sat overweight and not looking after themselves. And to get anywhere, unfortunately, in life, you want to be someone that's high energy and that's working on themselves, right? So I think that's very positive. There are things that he says, I think, about women that I don't actually agree with every single point that he makes about relationships and things like that, but to say that he is, a rapist or people trafficker or this kind of thing, I think that's completely out of context, and I don't think that that's correct. I think that he has a certain worldview on his relationships that maybe I don't hold the same worldview. To say that he abuses and is nasty to women is a different story, right? So this is where things get lost, right, in the context. Just because you don't like the way that he has his intimate relationships, it's fine, but that doesn't mean that you can make him out to be a certain person because you disagree with him, right? A lot of people they hate the truth, right? And the truth is that some people can have a relationship like that and have multiple women and lead that kind of life, and maybe because someone is not capable of doing that, or they don't agree with that, they see that as a negative, and straight away oh no, I don't like that, let's label him like this. So I think, again, look at it, take it with a pinch of salt. But from meeting him and things like that, I do feel that he is a good person, and that he doesn't harm people, especially women as well.
Saw a quote a couple of months back, which is it's just nuance is the new N word, and I loved it because it's so true with regards to the conversation. It's bubbling over.
Yeah,
Public discourse is so black and white, and I suppose he does rise to fill the void of masculinity, which obviously you're not going to adore someone and take all of their views into your own worldview. But definitely, he's speaking. There's a reason why he's grown so much traction. I think understanding the root level of that as to why that has occurred is far more important than what he's actually saying on the surface level.
for sure.
One of the things that I think is interesting is not just about him, but about the general mindset of people that you've potentially come across in your network as you've scaled up. Is there any significant difference you can notice between the average Joe and people who are operating at a high level in terms of mindset?
It's a really good question. I'd say the number one thing is limiting beliefs, right? So for everyone that I've worked with and people that are at a high level, they don't really have this, and I go back to it, kind of like they have this growth mindset. They believe that anything is possible, and they believe that they can achieve what they want to achieve. And you see a lot of people, I would say maybe the average Joe, and I don't like to shit on the average Joe and stuff like that, but let's just talk about, average versus someone that is really excelling. The average person might have some limiting beliefs that hold them back. So this could be, if they're overweight, it's kind of like, well, it's my genetics and I'm always going to be like that. Or they're in a bad relationship with their girlfriend. They're like, oh, well, I'm terrible with girls. I'm always going to be like that. Or, from a business point of view, it could be like, oh, I've got this belief that, because I'm this ethnicity, or I grew up at this, I don't know, I grew up in this town, or I went to this college, that I'm not going to be financially successful, right? There's a lot of these things, and when you couple that with environment, so environment that reinforces things like that. So, let's say you believe you're not going to be successful from the town that you're in, and then you're in the town that you're in with people that believe the same thing. You know what? Your worldview is going to be like, maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm not going to be successful because of this, and people are telling me this. Whereas if you break out of the limit and believe to say, actually, let's look at what's possible. And this is why I'm a big proponent of traveling, meeting new people, because you get different experiences. You're kind of like, oh shit, this guy is like 21 and he's like a multi-millionaire. Like, how's that happened? Like, I didn't really see that in my hometown. You're like, okay, let's find that out. And then he says, you can do this as well. You're like, oh shit, maybe I can, right? So it's this level of like environment and breaking limiting beliefs, which I think is really powerful, and that a lot of successful people do. They put themselves in the right environment every day, whether that's the right because they're the right groups, or living with the right people, or being in the right restaurants, the right places that kind of aid their mindset, as well as kind of having this mindset that they can break through some of the challenges that they're facing, and that there is growth on the other side. I think those two things are really powerful.
Speaking about self-limiting beliefs, and ironically, again, I know you did speak about this on Darren's podcast, and I
Sure.
wrote it down as a question before I heard his podcast, which is kind of frustrating, but I'll ask it again. Because you released a video on YouTube about how can short men attract women, and one
Yep.
of the things that I'm 5'9", so maybe slightly on the short side, but there can be that tendency, not only in terms of shortness, but also other immutable characteristics, where we have self-limiting beliefs about what is possible in a certain environment. It doesn't even have to be dating. But speaking specifically about this, I think there's a statistic that a man who is 5'6" needs to earn an additional 175 grand a year to be
Yeah.
as desirable as a man who is 6 foot, which is a crazy statistics. But money aside, what are other ways in which short men can attract women?
It's a really good question. So I'm 5'7", just to let the audience know. So on the shorter side as well, and it's kind of weird, right? Like, I think the number one thing, like the first thing is you have zero control. Like, you have zero control over it, right? Like, unless you get your kneecaps done, or you wear kind of stilts, you're never going to be any taller, right? You're always going to be the height that you're at. So you need to accept it. And the second thing is you need to own it as well, right? So it's all about framing, right? So you need to frame it as like, yeah, I'm 5'7", but I'm going to be like the best, funnest, coolest, most jacked 5'7" guy that I can ever be. Because at the end of the day, what's the other choice? The other choice is you be a miserable 5'7" guy. Well, the miserable 5'7" guy, he's definitely not getting any girls, right? So I think really, like, it's about building the other parts to you. And I think the great part of being a man is you can build a lot of these things, right? So you can build your income, you can build your body, you can build your network, you can build your social skills by doing a lot of these things, by actively working on yourself. I think when people say, oh, I'm short, like I don't get any girls, it's kind of a bit of a cope, because all of the successful guys that I've seen that are tall, that are short, they don't struggle with girls, right? Like, does Tom Cruise struggle with girls? He's 5'7". Does Mark Wahlberg struggle with girls? No, he's 5'7". Does Al Pacino struggle with girls? Probably not. All of these guys are like less than 5'10", like 5'9", 5'7". So when I take those examples, it kind of makes sense that you can work on so many other things, your style, your income, the gym, all of this kind of stuff, being an interesting person. And I think building that will allow, you to attract the right girls. And again, just being focused on yourself, right? You focus on the right things, you will attract the right things. Especially with girls, like, one of the things I've found is, the more you chase, the more you repel. But the more you kind of focus on yourself and, this internal part of you, and these other parts, like, you then become a magnet to attract things. And that goes with girls as well, right? So yeah, that's kind of my view on what you should do as a short guy.
It parallels, I think, one of the tweets that you shared a while back, which I picked up on, which is, there's nothing harder but more liberating than accepting you're the one who's been holding you back this whole time. And it ties into
Yeah.
the self-limiting beliefs. It ties into that whole thing of being, oh, I'm only short, or perhaps I look a certain way, or I grew up in a certain community, or whatever it may be. But you speak about that kind of harsh truth and then working on what you can change. But
Mhm.
I actually recently spoke with Colin about that challenge, that the judgment, the balance between judgment and grace. So what I mean by that is, how can you make self-improvement and look in the mirror without being too harsh on yourself? Because I have friends who rip themselves apart too much and be like really like emotionally volatile as a result, because they'll be like focused on, like, I really messed up here, or I really need to improve myself, but it will mean they'll just rip themselves to shreds. So how do people who are looking to improve themselves, not just short kings, try and balance between like being loving? Because I know, you'll probably appreciate this, but the culture is being far too much in that direction of being cushy and
Yeah.
no harsh of reality. So how do you like strike that balance? Because it's not the other way either, is it? It's somewhere in the middle.
Absolutely, man. You hit the nail on the head. It's finding that balance between I love myself, but I'm gonna still improve, right? And I think that that's the way that you need to look at it, is kind of like, hey, look, I am good enough, or I am a person worthy of everything that I need to achieve, right? But maybe I need to do some things in some certain areas to help improve my chances of it happening. And again, this goes back to all of those things that I mentioned. So just regularly going to the gym, looking after yourself, but not being overly obsessive and neurotic about it. I think if you go too far down one side where you're kind of like obsessed with body fat percentage, you're obsessed with status, you're obsessed with income, like all of these things, they take it away from who you are, like your personality. And I think that really, like, the key to not just being a short king, but actually to having a success is like your personality, right? Like, people buy into you. There's no other you in the world. It sounds so fucking cheesy, right? But if you work on all these other things, right, like your money, your game, your body, and things like that, well, the key differentiator between you and everyone else isn't those things. It's who you are as a person, like what you enjoy, being confident in your own skin, the things that make you unique, whatever they are, right? And they're different for different people. So I think really, like, because they're a competitive advantage for people, and a way to not be so over obsessed is to lean into who you are as a person and really your personality types. Because if you can do that, that's going to set you far apart people, compared to the guy that just cares about money, just cares about his body, just cares about status, and doesn't have any personality. Because there are tons of those guys out there. But where is the guy that is, working on all those things, but is really leaning into who he is as a person, his personality being fun, caring, all of these kind of traits that you want in a person, as well. So yeah, that's kind of how I'd view it, if that makes sense. I went off on a bit of a tangent again.
No. It is building a good picture, and hopefully it is for the listeners as well. I'm conscious of time, but I do want to ask one question to kind of
Sure.
overview. So we've touched on potentially a few topics that are on the fringe or contentious. Some would deem, I wouldn't. But
Okay.
my question really is, as you've built your personal brand and built your own income, have you noticed that there's a difference in what you're able to say compared with people who potentially are reliant on brands or reliant on a company to pay their income? And do you think that there's going to be a real struggle between being able to have own autonomy and freedom of expression as we live in this age of censorship and trying to shut down opinions that go against the mainstream narrative?
Yeah, man. I think there are, and I think for people that are working for companies, especially big companies that have very strict, you could say, I don't know what the word is, but you could say, corporate conduct or whatever it is called, right? I think people will be strict, right? And especially what you're seeing now in the West and in the UK and in America, moving towards more of this kind of like, we're always offended society. There are going to be people that are going to question what you say, especially if it's against the narrative that's there. So, for me, I've been fortunate that now that I have, like I say, my own business, that I have a lot more freedom to say the things that I want to say. And even now, though, I'm still careful of what I say, because I do know that saying the wrong thing and being too extreme can get me cancelled. And obviously that you've seen that with people like Andrew Tate. And some people, the level now, right, like Andrew, where he's got all the money, it doesn't really matter if he gets cancelled. Well, it might be a little bit now, but I do think that it has an impact. But I think on the flip side, for us to kind of challenge the narrative, there needs to be people that speak out. And I think that if you do have a platform, like me, or people like one of my mentors is actually Zuby, who's reached 1 million followers on Twitter now. He speaks the truth, and he does it in a way that is articulate, that doesn't try to um, you know offend anybody. He says it in a way that is like very well spoken and doesn't try to attack certain people despite what they might think. And I think there is a way to still get your opinion out and do it in the right way, and do it in a way that's respectful to others, and things like that. So yeah, I do think it's a challenge, but I think for the people that do have the ability to speak up, that they should, and that they should say what they believe in, because it's then going to give the other people the confidence to then do it. it's like when you're at a restaurant, right, and something bad happens and no one wants to speak up. Well, if one person speaks up, then other people start speaking up, right? And it gives that confidence. So I would say that to people is, yeah, definitely speak out if you can, if you have a good platform, and that's going to help other people as well feel confident to do so.
What we spoke about Zuby is essentially that balance of grace and judgment, but applied to
Yep,
how you convey with other people, not only internally. You're delivering a potentially sensitive or harsh truth, but in a way that is loving and
yep.
compassionate, and hopefully you can guide people with love back towards the truth. I
Hmm.
know you've got a call at 5 o'clock, so I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I feel like this is the most I've ever packed into such a short amount of time in a podcast in terms of information. So thank you very much for your time. And
No
if people
worries,
want to
man.
find you, how can they do so?
Yeah, sure. So you can actually find me on Twitter is the main one, the Oliver Anwar, same for Instagram. And then if you search Oliver Anwar Health on YouTube, you can find me as well.